Hey guys, welcome to my full series review for Fullmetal Alchemist. Now I'm just going to get straight to the point. I think that this series right here is a masterpiece. So I'm very excited to bring you guys my review so I can explain exactly why I think this is a masterpiece. Now Fullmetal Alchemist is a manga series written and drawn by Hiromu Arakawa, and it was published in Monthly Shonen Gangan from 2001 to 2010. Now, Fullmetal Alchemist takes place in a world where alchemy is a thing. Now, alchemy is a science that consists of basically rearranging the elements of certain objects and creating something new. Now, the people who have this ability are, of course, called alchemists. And every alchemist knows that there is one law of alchemy that is always absolute, and that is equivalent exchange. Now, this law states that to obtain something of equal value must be lost. So if you wanted to take a wooden house and turn it into a wooden boat, it would need to have the exact same amount of wood. Now our two main characters of the story are the brothers Edward and Alphonse Elric, who live with their mother and father in Risenbull, which is a quiet little town in the nation of Amestris. Now their father was a very skilled alchemist, but one day he just up and left without any explanation. He abandoned his family. He also leaves all of his alchemy research behind, which leaves Edward and Alphonse to start to learn alchemy. Now one day their mother falls ill and eventually dies of the plague. Now this is very devastating to the brothers, as not only have they just lost their mother, but they are also very young. And they decide, well, why don't we try to bring our mother back with alchemy? Now, human alchemy or human transmutation is taboo in this world. It is strictly forbidden. However, because their ignorance gets the best of them, the two brothers try to do it anyway. So they gather up all the components to make up a human body. However, what could equal the value of a human soul? The two brothers watch in horror as their transmutation goes completely to hell, and Edward ends up losing one of his legs, and Alphonse loses his entire body. Edward, who is bleeding out, uses his last remaining strength to bind his brother's soul to a nearby suit of armor. However, the price of this transmutation would end up being one of his arms. So now Edward is missing two of his limbs and Alphonse is in a giant metal suit of armor. And to make matters worse, the transmutation didn't even work. So I guess you could say they alchemist. You bitch! Now thankfully their neighbor Winry and her grandmother are automail mechanics. In this world, automail is basically prosthetic limbs. So Edward ends up getting the automail surgery, so now he can have a metal arm and a metal leg. However, he is feeling pretty depressed because he feels responsible for the entire thing. His brother is now in a suit of armor, and while he can still see and speak and have emotions, he basically can't feel anything. He can't eat. Like when he touches something, he won't be able to feel them. Now one day, Lieutenant Colonel Mustang, a state alchemist of the military, comes to Risenbull because he hears that two young brothers of this town are very skilled alchemists. And he was sent on a recruiting mission for the military to check these guys out, see if they are military worthy. But then, of course, he realizes what happened, and he's like, okay, listen, I'm not a douchebag. I'm not gonna rat you guys out to the military that you tried human transmutation, so here's what I'm gonna say. You should come and try out to be a state alchemist. Because if you become an alchemist who works for the military, you have access to thousands of books that you can use for research as to how to get your bodies back. The only problem with joining the military is, if ever there is some crazy stuff going on, some battles that need to be fought, some missions to go on, they will of course have to do it. Now despite the risks of joining the military, the brothers realize that this may be the only way to get their bodies back. Now Alphonse, being in a suit of armor, cannot become a state alchemist because the process of becoming one involves a body inspection, which of course he cannot get because the whole thing with their human transmutation is supposed to be kept a secret. So Edward takes the state alchemist exam and he ends up passing, becoming the youngest ever state alchemist at only the age of 12. They soon learn the existence of the Philosopher's Stone. Now this is a mysterious stone that not very many people know about that can supposedly bypass the laws of equivalent exchange. which would of course allow them to transmute their bodies back. So then the two brothers go off on a journey to find the Philosopher's Stone. And the beginning of this story starts 3 years later while they are on that same journey. However, the story is not just about these two brothers trying to return their bodies back to normal. There are some very sketchy things going on behind the scenes. These mysterious people show up with mysterious motivations. Some people who are very high up in the military have very shady backstories and may not be who they seem to be. And there are some very mysterious things surrounding the creation of Amestris, their country. All of these things added up almost make it seem like a greater power is at work. Anyway, yeah, so this story is friggin' amazing. It is like one of the greatest stories I have ever read. It starts off so simple with just two brothers with a common goal of finding the Philosopher's Stone, and then it just explodes into all this awesomeness. The story is so layered. Everything seemed like it was planned out from the beginning. It has crazy twists and turns. There are a lot of great fight scenes in this manga. It is all perfectly paced. It knows when to be sad, it knows when to be lighthearted, it knows when to be funny, it knows when to be dark and serious and have these crazy action scenes. It is just perfect. I don't want to go on about the story any longer because I don't want to give away anything else. It is best worth experiencing for yourself. And again, without spoiling anything, the ending of this series is amazing. Like, throughout the entire final volume, I just had goosebumps. And you just finish the manga feeling like you just read a complete story and you are fully satisfied. Alright, now we're on to characters, and I really don't know where to start with this one. There are just so many good characters in the series. So let's start with our protagonists, Edward and Alphonse Elric. They are just such great characters. They share such an incredible bond. I mean, uneducated people be talking about like Ash and Pikachu, man, like, oh yeah, their bond is like the greatest thing ever, and then you have people who've read Fullmetal Alchemist being like, bruh, get out. And then we have a ton of great side characters. We have their childhood friend Winry, we have Colonel Roy Mustang and his assistant Lieutenant Hawkeye. Both of those characters are extremely badass, and they have to be my favorite characters in the series. But the list of badass characters in this series is actually quite insane. Like, you have a whole bunch of other state alchemists who are really badass, a bunch of just normal alchemists who are really badass, even the villains. Half the time I'm cheering the villains on just because of how badass they are. And yes, the villains in this series are pretty nuts. There is a lot of villains in this series. There are also a lot of anti-heroes, you know, people who have their own goals and desires, but they don't really like people getting in their way. And then there are also villains who you are meant to hate with a burning passion. There is a certain character who is introduced very early in the series, who pretty much is universally considered the worst character ever. And not because he's a badly written character, on the contrary, his writing is so good that you just hate him. Oh, hold on, be right back, I gotta let the dog out. And yeah, the development is just super good. It's so well written. Some of these character arcs are truly excellent. And there are always motivations behind every character's actions. I talked about the ending before, but pretty much every character's story wraps up. There is not a single loose end. Even characters that I didn't think would be touched upon in the finale were. So yeah, in conclusion for the characters, they're all badass, they're all amazing development, just, again, just so good, and the way these characters complement the already amazing story just makes this series fantastic. Next up, we are of course going to be talking about the art. Now, this art isn't like Vagabond or Berserk levels of good, but it doesn't need to be. As a monthly serialization, this series looks really good. The characters are very expressive, and oftentimes Arakawa uses this very exaggerated art style to, you know, do some comedy, and it's friggin' hilarious. Now the action scenes in particular are very well done. They are very creative. A lot of the villains in the series have some pretty crazy powers, and the art makes them look super good. So yeah, no real complaints about the art. I think it looks excellent, and it has to be one of my favorite art styles in comics. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Fullmetal Alchemist, my favorite manga of all time as of right now, because you never know when that'll change. And yeah, so I pretty much explained to you why I think this series is so good, why I think it is a masterpiece. So it, of course, gets my final verdict of 10 out of 10 IGN would rate 8 mate. And with that, I give Fullmetal Alchemist my score of 6 prosthetic limbs out of 5. As of the time I'm recording this video, Fullmetal Alchemist is in print and available from Viz Media. You can pick up these single volumes all by themselves. There are 27 in total. They also come in a very nice and very cheap box set, which contains all 27 volumes as well as a poster and one of the Fullmetal Alchemist spin-off light novels. Now this is the way I got the series and the way that I would recommend other people to buy it. It is also available in 9 3-in-1s. However, I said in my Dragon Ball review that I don't really like the quality of the 3-in-1s that Viz does, but if the standard 3-in-1s don't bother you, then they are another cheap way to get this manga. Now, as most of you know, this series was adapted into an anime that came out in 2003, which starts off following the manga. However, it eventually cuts off from the main story and basically does its own thing to the point where it is completely different. Now, while I do greatly prefer the story of the manga, the 2003 anime is still really good and I would recommend it. However, I would recommend watching this series before you read the manga or watch Brotherhood. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is a 2009 anime adaptation of the manga, which more or less follows it completely. And because I think the manga is a masterpiece, I think this is one of the greatest anime of all time, and if you are not that big on reading manga, then definitely watch Brotherhood. And even if you have read the manga, then definitely watch Brotherhood. There was also a 2005 movie made to serve as the conclusion to the 2003 series, as well as another movie called The Sacred Star of Milos, which is basically like a side story. All of the anime I just mentioned are available from Funimation. So that was my review on Fullmetal Alchemist. I love the series, and if guys, for whatever reason, if you have not checked it out yet, then you definitely should go do that right now. Go on. Do it! And with that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next full series review of Silent